Stonehenge stands silent in the morning mist, an ancient riddle carved in stone. For centuries, we have wondered how our ancestors built it and why. Yet the monument's greatest secret may not be about its creation, but about a single, brutal event that unfolded there millennia later. A discovery of bones and blades has rewritten history. By the end of this, you will know the truth behind a medieval mass execution that turned a sacred temple into a killing ground. Who were the dozens of men beheaded at this legendary site, and what forgotten king ordered their deaths? What does it mean when a place of wonder becomes a place of violence? The sheer scale of Stonehenge defies simple explanation. This was not a single project but a grand, evolving vision that spanned over 1,500 years, from around 3000 BC to 1500 BC. It began with a simple circular ditch and bank, a sacred space marked out on the open plain. Then came the first stones, the smaller blue stones, transported an astonishing 140 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales. Imagine the determination, the generations of people moving these multi-ton rocks using only ropes, rollers, and sheer human effort. The final and most dramatic phase brought the giant sarsen stones. These monolithic pillars, each weighing up to 25 tons, were dragged from quarries over 20 miles away, shaped with stone tools, and raised into the iconic trilithons we see today. For what purpose? Theories have swirled for centuries. Was it a precise astronomical calendar, its stones aligned with the solstice sun? A temple for healing where the blue stones held magical properties? A unifying ceremonial center for scattered tribes? For so long, the entire conversation has been about its birth, about the brilliant, enigmatic minds who conceived of it. We have been staring so intently at the question of how and why it was built that we created a perfect historical blind spot. We assumed its story essentially ended when its builders walked away. This focus on its Neolithic origins meant we almost missed the chilling evidence of what happened at Stonehenge nearly 4,000 years later, when an entirely different people arrived with a very different purpose. The stones, having witnessed celebration and ceremony, were about to become silent witnesses to something far darker. The story of Stonehenge took a sharp, unexpected turn in the summer of 2013. Archaeologists with the Stonehenge Riverside project were conducting a meticulous excavation, focusing on a specific feature known as the Aubrey Holes. These are a ring of 56 pits just inside the monument's massive circular bank, named for the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey who first identified them. The team was methodically working, their trowels scraping through layers of chalk and soil. Their expectations were shaped by decades of precedent. They anticipated finding fragments of Neolithic pottery, perhaps flint tools, or the cremated remains of the monument's builders. The kind of quiet, ancient artifacts that slowly fill in the puzzle of a site's early life. The atmosphere was one of careful, academic focus. Then a trowel struck something different, not the clean edge of a worked flint, but the unmistakable, porous texture of bone. As they carefully expanded the excavation, the scale of the find became alarmingly clear. This was not a single, carefully placed burial. It was a chaotic jumble of skeletal remains, a tangled mass of limbs and skulls piled together within the confines of the ancient pit. The initial reaction was profound confusion. This disorder contradicted everything they knew about Neolithic burial practices at the site, which typically involved individual cremations. A cold realization began to dawn in the quiet English air. They were not looking at a sacred burial from the age of the stones, they were staring into a mass grave. The pit revealed a story written in bone. As archaeologists carefully sifted through the soil, a grim tally emerged. They recovered the fragmented remains of at least 38 individuals, all men. The sheer number was staggering, but it was the condition of the bones that told the true horror. many of the skulls were found completely detached from their bodies. When the team examined the cervical vertebrae, the small bones of the neck, they found the undeniable proof. Clear, sharp cut marks scored the bone surfaces, evidence of a blade slicing through muscle and tendon with brutal force. This was not disease, not an accident, and certainly not a reverent burial. This was systematic, violent death. Through CGI reconstruction, we can visualize the pit as it was found, a disorderly heap of skeletons, limbs tangled, with skulls lying separate from the torsos they once belonged to. A close-up graphic of a single vertebra tells a chillingly specific story. The cut marks are precise and deep, located exactly where an executioner's sword or axe would land to sever a head from the body with a single, powerful blow. This was not a battlefield where wounds could be chaotic. The consistency of the trauma points to a single, grim purpose: deliberate, efficient decapitation. Stonehenge, for a terrible moment in time, had become an execution ground. But who were these men, and when did this happen? The first and most crucial clue came not from the bones themselves, but from the atoms trapped within them. Archaeologists carefully selected samples from the skeletal remains and sent them off for radiocarbon dating, a scientific process that measures the decay of radioactive carbon to determine an organic object's age. The team waited for the results, likely expecting dates that would place the bodies closer to the time of Stonehenge's use, perhaps a grim footnote from the late Neolithic or Bronze Age. When the lab report came back, it delivered a shock that completely shattered the existing narrative. The bones were not thousands of years old in the way they had assumed. The radiocarbon dates placed the time of death squarely between 600 and 1020 AD. This was not the deep, misty past of the monument's builders. This was the Anglo-Saxon period, a historical era of kings, kingdoms, and written records. A violent drama had unfolded at Stonehenge over 2,000 years after the last giant sarsen stone was raised. In an instant, the entire mystery was reframed. This was no longer an ancient ritual from the shadowy builders of the circle. This was a specific historical event, a moment of calculated terror that occurred when Stonehenge was already an ancient, enigmatic ruin looming over the Saxon landscape. The question now shifted with jarring clarity. What catastrophic conflict in the age of Alfred the Great and Viking invasions could have led to the systematic beheading of 36 men at this specific hallowed place? The bones themselves began to whisper the victims' stories. Osteoarchaeology, the science of reading skeletons, provided a hauntingly intimate profile of the men who met their end at Stonehenge. First, the demographic was starkly uniform. Of the 38 individuals identified, every single one was male. Their ages clustered tightly between 18 and 45 years old, placing them squarely in the prime of their physical lives. These were not the elderly or the very young. They were a group of men at their peak strength. Analysis of their bones revealed more than just their age and sex. The muscle attachment points on their skeletons were pronounced and robust, a clear sign of a life filled with strenuous, repetitive physical labor. Their bones told of powerful shoulders, strong legs, and developed backs. Yet, intriguingly, a close search for older, healed injuries, the kind of scars a veteran warrior might carry from past conflicts, came up largely empty. There were no telltale parry fractures on their forearms, common in men trained to block sword blows, no old arrow wounds or healed blade marks on their ribs or skulls. This crucial absence suggests these men, while undoubtedly strong and active, were not seasoned fighters. They had not lived a life on the battlefield. So who were they? The science delved deeper with isotopic analysis, a technique that reads the chemical signatures locked in teeth and bones, signatures laid down by the food and water a person consumes. The isotopes from these men pointed to a diet heavily based on terrestrial plants and animals, consistent with the agricultural lifestyle of early medieval Britain. More specifically, the strontium and oxygen isotopes, which reflect the geology and climate of where a person grew up, did not show signatures wildly foreign to the Salisbury Plain region. While not definitive proof, it strongly hints that these men were likely local, or at least from within a broad swath of southern Britain. They were not a band of exotic invaders from a distant land. The picture that emerges is tragically clear. This was not an army of elite soldiers. It was a group of local men, farmers or laborers perhaps in robust health, captured together from their own communities. They were led to the ancient stones not for a battle but for a slaughter. The forensic evidence on the bones tells us exactly how these men died. Each vertebra is a crime scene. The cut marks are not random slashes. They are precise, deep gouges concentrated on the back of the neck bones, right where the spine meets the skull. The angle of these cuts is the first crucial clue. They descend sharply from behind, striking downward and slightly inward. This trajectory means the blade was swung from above and behind the victim. The man was almost certainly on his knees, his head bent forward with the executioner standing over him. The weapon needed to create such deep, focused trauma was heavy and sharp. This points directly to an early medieval sword, a seax, or a broad-bladed axe, tools of war, not farming. A short knife or dagger simply could not generate the force required to sever a neck in one blow. We can reconstruct the grim biomechanics. The executioner raises the weapon high. The victim is immobilized, perhaps bound, with a powerful, focused swing. The blade arcs down, its weight and edge driven by muscle connecting with the exposed neck. In a clean strike, it would slice through skin, muscle, and ligament before biting deep into the bone and severing the spinal cord in an instant. But not all strikes were clean. The bones reveal a more gruesome reality. On some vertebrae, scientists found multiple overlapping cut marks clustered around the same spot. This tells a story of hesitation, poor aim, or a lack of skill. The first blow failed to finish the job, requiring a second or even a third hacking strike to complete the grisly task. This variation is chilling. It suggests the person wielding the blade was not a specialized headsman, practiced in the grim art of efficient execution. He may have been a soldier ordered to carry out a terrible duty, his hand unsteady or his technique flawed. So we have a scene of horrific, industrialized violence, a line of local men forced to their knees before the ancient stones, behind each one a man with a sword following orders. Some deaths were swift, a single, brutal punctuation to a life. Others were agonizingly messy. This was not a frenzied massacre. It was a deliberate, ceremonial act of power performed in the shadow of a monument that had stood for millennia. Why choose this place? What message was being sent to the living by killing here in this way? To understand why these men died at Stonehenge, we must step into the violent world they lived in. This was not the unified England we know today. From the 6th to the 9th centuries, the land was fractured into a patchwork of competing kingdoms known as the Heptarchy. Think of it as a brutal, long-running Game of Thrones played out across the English countryside. Powerful realms like Wessex in the south, Mercia in the Midlands, and Northumbria in the north were locked in a constant struggle for land, tribute, and supremacy. Kings rose and fell, borders shifted with the seasons, and loyalty was a currency spent on the battlefield. This was a time of ceaseless small wars, raids for cattle and slaves, and shifting alliances where a neighboring king was just as likely to be your enemy as a distant invader. And right into the heart of this simmering conflict lay the Salisbury Plain, with the silent stones of Stonehenge watching over it. The monument sat in a perilous, ambiguous zone, a frontier region often contested between the expanding power of Wessex and the formidable kingdom of Mercia to its north. This was not a peaceful, settled heartland. It was a borderland, a place where power was uncertain and control had to be demonstrated, often brutally. Then, in the late 8th century, a new and terrifying storm broke upon these already warring shores. the Viking Age began. First came the shocking raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793, a strike that seemed to come from another world. It was a prelude to decades of escalating horror. What started as hit-and-run attacks on undefended coastal monasteries soon evolved into something far more dangerous. Great Viking armies, hundreds or even thousands strong, began to overwinter in England. They used fast, shallow-draft longships to raid deep inland along rivers, striking at the very centers of Anglo-Saxon power. They were mobile, ruthless, and sought not just plunder but land itself. Kingdoms that had spent centuries fighting each other now faced an existential threat from outside. The political landscape became a nightmare of three-way chaos. An Anglo-Saxon king might be fighting a rival kingdom one season, and then desperately trying to ally with that same rival the next to face a common Viking foe. It was an era of extreme violence, political fracture, and raw survival. In such a world, a local rebellion or the betrayal of a sworn oath was not just a political inconvenience. It was a lethal danger that could collapse an entire kingdom from within, especially if it happened in a contested border region like the lands around Stonehenge. Authority had to be absolute, and dissent had to be crushed publicly, memorably, and with overwhelming force. A message needed to be sent that would echo through the hills and settle in the hearts of every farmer and chieftain for miles around. What better place to stage such a terrifying spectacle than at the most awe-inspiring ancient landmark on the entire plain? The stones themselves, already shrouded in mystery and older than memory, would amplify the king's message, binding his raw, temporal power to the deep, timeless authority of the place. This execution was not hidden away. It was a calculated performance on the grandest stage imaginable. The stones have given us the how and the when, but the identity of the victims remains a ghost in the machine. Who were these 38 men, and whose justice condemned them? Historians and archaeologists have pieced together two compelling, yet opposing, theories, each painting a very different picture of that fatal day. The first theory points a bloody finger directly at the Viking menace. The timeline fits perfectly. The radiocarbon date range, 600 to 1020 AD, squarely encompasses the height of Viking terror in England, particularly the late 9th century when the great heathen army carved a path of destruction across the land. We know Viking war bands were not just coastal raiders. They struck deep inland, using rivers like the Thames and Avon as highways. The Salisbury Plain, with its rich monasteries and undefended settlements, would have been a prime target. A Viking raiding party, perhaps ranging far from their ships in search of plunder or slaves, could easily have been intercepted by a local Anglo-Saxon force. If captured, their fate would have been sealed. The Anglo-Saxons were no strangers to brutal justice, and executing pagan invaders who had desecrated churches and murdered monks would have been seen as both punishment and piety. The method fits a grim pattern. Vikings themselves were known for the blood eagle, a ritualized execution, and beheading was a common fate for prisoners of war across many cultures. Executing them at Stonehenge, a site of immense ancient power, would have added a layer of symbolic triumph, a statement that the old gods of the land had defeated the new invaders. But the forensic evidence gives us pause. The isotopic analysis suggested the men were likely local to Britain, not Scandinavians who grew up on a diet rich in fish from distant northern fjords. Could they have been Anglo-Saxon locals forced into a Viking army? It was not uncommon for Vikings to press captured men into service, or for disaffected Saxons to join them. Or perhaps the roles were tragically reversed. What if these were not Vikings at all, but a group of Anglo-Saxon militiamen, farmers who took up arms to defend their homes from a raid? If they were defeated and captured, a vengeful Viking commander might have ordered their execution as a warning to other communities. The Vikings were strategic in their terror. A mass beheading at a revered site would paralyze a region with fear, making future raids easier. Historical records for Wiltshire during this period are frustratingly sparse, a common problem in the chaos of the Viking Age. There are mentions of battles and movements of the great army nearby, but no specific chronicle entry that says, "And here at the stone circle they slew many." This absence is both a mystery and a clue. It suggests this event, while catastrophic for the victims, might have been just one of many such horrors in a time drenched in violence, not remarkable enough for the monks writing the chronicles to single out. So the Viking theory stands on the timeline and the motive, but wavers on the origins of the men. If not strangers from the sea, then who were they? This leads us to a second, even more politically charged possibility, one that hits closer to home. The second theory casts an even darker shadow, one of betrayal and power from within the Anglo-Saxon world itself. This was not an external invader, but a king turning his fury upon his own people. In the brutal calculus of early medieval kingship, rebellion was a cancer that had to be cut out with absolute finality. A local nobleman rising in revolt, a rival claimant to a throne, or even a captured war banned from a neighboring Saxon kingdom, any of these could have been seen as a threat so severe it demanded a spectacular, unforgettable response. Kings like Offa of Mercia, who ruled with an iron fist in the late 8th century, or Alfred the Great of Wessex, who fought desperately to unify kingdoms against the Vikings, were not sentimental men. Their authority was forged in fire, and they knew that to rule, they had to command not just respect but fear. Executing a few leaders in private might end a revolt. But executing dozens of men in a single, terrifying ceremony, that ended the very idea of rebellion for a generation. The choice of location then becomes the masterstroke of psychological terror. Stonehenge was not a convenient empty field. It was a place already heavy with meaning, a nexus of ancient power and mystery that predated any living king's lineage. By staging a mass execution there, a ruler was doing something profoundly clever. He was layering his own raw, temporal authority onto the timeless, spiritual authority of the monument. He was saying, "My justice is as eternal as these stones. My power is woven into the very fabric of this land." The victims, whether they were rebels from a nearby village or captured soldiers from a rival kingdom, became more than just dead men. They became a permanent warning, their blood literally soaking into the soil of a sacred site. Anyone who later came to wonder at the ancient circle would also feel the chilling memory of the king's wrath. This transforms the event from a mere punishment into a piece of political theater, a gruesome spectacle designed to be witnessed, remembered, and retold in fearful whispers. The forensic evidence fits this grisly picture perfectly. The men were local, strong, and of fighting age, exactly the profile of a nobleman's personal retinue or a levied militia. Their lack of old battle wounds doesn't rule them out as fighters. It simply suggests they were not lifelong professional soldiers, which most men in that era were not. They could have been farmers one month and spearmen the next, called to serve their local lord in a doomed uprising. Their uniform manner of death, beheading from behind, speaks to a formalized execution following a capture or surrender, not the chaotic wounds of a pitched battle. So we are left with two haunting possibilities, each with its own terrible logic. Were they Viking raiders cut down as they threatened the heart of Wessex? Or were they Saxon rebels sacrificed by their own king to cement his control over a contested frontier? The stones keep that final secret, but to choose between these theories, we must look beyond the bones and the blade marks to the very landscape they died in. What was happening around Stonehenge in those violent centuries, and what forgotten battle might have filled that pit with the dead? The grave itself holds as many clues in what is missing as in what was found. Among the tangled bones, archaeologists searched in vain for any trace of personal belongings. No swords, no seekers, not a single spearhead or shield boss. No brooches, belt buckles, or rings, not even the simple iron knife that every free man would have carried for daily tasks. they were buried utterly empty-handed. This absence screams of deliberate action. These men were stripped, their valuables taken as plunder or perhaps as rightful forfeit to the crown. More telling still is the condition of their remains. Forensic analysis found no evidence that their hands or wrists had been bound with ropes or cords before death. No telltale grooves or wear patterns on the smaller bones of the hands and arms suggest they were tied. This is a crucial, chilling detail. It means in their final moments, these 38 men were not restrained. They knelt or stood before their executioners, likely surrounded by armed guards with their own hands free. They could have fought, they could have tried to run, but they did not. This points to a grim resignation, a surrender to an inescapable fate. Perhaps they had been captured days earlier, their spirit broken. Or maybe they submitted to what they believed was a lawful, if brutal, sentence. Their compliance made the process efficient, a production line of death. Finally, there is the sheer indignity of their burial. They were not laid to rest with care. They were not placed in individual graves arranged with respect. They were thrown, one atop another, into a hole that already existed, the ancient Aubrey hole, dug millennia before for a completely different purpose. It was a convenient ditch, a ready-made pit for disposal. This haphazard dumping is the ultimate insult. In the Anglo-Saxon worldview, how you were buried mattered profoundly. An honorable burial with your possessions for the afterlife reflected your status and ensured your passage. To be denied this was to be cast out, not just from life, but from memory and community. The message carved into this act is one of total contempt. This was not just an execution, it was a complete erasure. The powerful entity that ordered this did not just want these men dead. They wanted them humiliated, stripped of identity, and forgotten as if they had never existed. Their very bones were treated as rubbish, discarded in a hole in the ground at a site of ancient power, perhaps to taint their souls as well as end their lives. This level of calculated disrespect narrows our search for a culprit. It speaks of a rage that goes beyond the pragmatic killing of enemy soldiers. This feels personal, punitive, and deeply symbolic. It feels like the act of a ruler making an example so terrifying, so complete, that no one would dare challenge him again. But to find that ruler, we must leave the grave and look to the land, to the very roads and hilltops that surround Stonehenge, for the stage was set long before the blade ever fell. The meaning of a place is not fixed in stone, even when the place itself is. For the Neolithic people who built Stonehenge, it was a living temple, a cosmic clock, a sacred meeting point between earth and sky. But by the time our 38 men were led there, over 2,000 years later, its original purpose was long forgotten, buried under layers of time and new belief. To the Anglo-Saxons who farmed the surrounding plains, Stonehenge was a ruin from a world before their own, a mysterious relic they could not explain. Their name for it survives in old texts, Stonehenges or the hanging stones, but they had another, more evocative term. They called it the Giant's Dance. This was not a temple to them. It was a monument built by a race of ancient supernatural beings, a place of eerie power left over from a mythic age. And in the medieval mind, such liminal places, sites that existed outside the normal bounds of the Christian, settled world, often took on a new, grim function. They became places of judgment. Across Britain, we see this pattern repeated. Ancient long barrows, the burial mounds of a people even older than Stonehenge's builders, were frequently chosen as locations for gallows and execution grounds. Why would a Christian kingdom use pagan sites for its most solemn and terrible justice? The reasoning was deeply psychological and politically brilliant. These locations were already feared and respected. They were seen as thresholds, as places where the veil between worlds was thin. By performing executions there, the crown was harnessing that existing primal awe and bending it to a new purpose. It was a way of saying that royal law was as fundamental and inescapable as the ancient powers of the land itself. The message was clear: our justice is as old as these hills, as permanent as these stones. To defy the king was to defy the very order of the world. So Stonehenge, the ultimate giant's dance, presented the perfect stage. Its towering trilithons formed a natural amphitheater, a circle that could contain and focus the drama of a public execution. The act of beheading 36 men, there was not a random act of violence in a convenient field. It was a calculated piece of political theater. The king, or his representative, was co-opting the monument's timeless, mysterious authority to legitimize his own temporal power. He was layering a new, terrifying meaning onto the old stones. In that moment, Stonehenge was transformed. It ceased to be a relic of a lost giant race and became something else entirely. A gallows of epic scale, a symbol of royal wrath made manifest in the most unforgettable way possible. The blood soaked into the chalk was meant to stain not just the ground, but the memory of every person who heard the tale. This was how you cemented control in a contested borderland. You made the most awe-inspiring landmark in the region a testament to your absolute, unforgiving power. But to move from this powerful symbolism to a specific name, a specific king, we must search the historical record for a conflict brutal enough and close enough to fill that pit. The teeth of the dead men held a chemical diary of their childhoods. To read it, scientists turned to a powerful forensic tool called isotopic analysis. This is not about dating the bones, but about mapping the life within them. When we are young, our permanent teeth are forming, locking minerals from our food and water into their enamel. This enamel becomes a time capsule, preserving the unique chemical fingerprint of the environment we grew up in. Two elements are particularly telling: strontium and oxygen. Strontium isotopes vary based on the underlying geology. The ancient chalk of the Salisbury Plain, for instance, has a very different strontium signature than the granite of Scotland or the old rocks of Wales. Oxygen isotopes, meanwhile, vary with climate and rainfall patterns. The water you drink as a child carries a signature of the local weather. By drilling a tiny sample from a molar and vaporizing it in a mass spectrometer, scientists can extract these signatures and compare them to geological maps of Britain. The results from the Stonehenge victims were startling, and they shattered the simpler theory of a purely local tragedy. The analysis revealed a mosaic of origins. Yes, some of the men did show isotopic values consistent with the chalklands of Wessex, the very region surrounding the stones. They could have been local farmers or herdsmen. But many others did not. Their chemical fingerprints pointed to geologies found farther afield, to the west, to the north, to regions with older, harder rock. Some likely came from other parts of southern Britain, but a significant portion of the group showed signatures that suggested origins far outside the Wessex heartland, possibly from as far away as western Scotland or even northern Wales. This single scientific finding changes everything. This was not a band of neighbors rounded up from a single village. This was a gathered host, a collection of men brought together from many different corners of the land. They had grown up drinking from different streams, eating food grown in different soils under different skies, yet they all met the same end on the same day in the same chalk pit. So what could possibly assemble such a diverse group in 9th century Britain, only to destroy them? The answer points away from a small local conflict and toward something much larger, a machinery of war or politics that had a long reach. The isotopic mosaic of their origins is the single most important clue. These were not local men caught in a petty feud. They were a band of warriors assembled from across the land, a fact that narrows our suspects dramatically. In the fractured world of 9th century Britain, only one kind of power had the reach to gather such a diverse group: a king. Specifically, a king with a royal retinue, his personal war band known as a Hyorthwarod. These were not conscripted farmers. They were professional fighters, sworn to their lord by oaths of loyalty that were stronger than steel. A king's retinue was his sword arm and his shield wall. drawn from the best sons of allied families across his kingdom and sometimes beyond. They lived in his hall, ate at his table, and followed him to the ends of the earth. Their varied isotopic signatures make perfect sense in this context. A powerful ruler like the King of Wessex or Mercia would have young nobles and seasoned warriors sent to his court from allied regions as pledges of loyalty, creating a fighting force with roots in many different geologies. They trained together, fought together, and forged a bond that made them the most formidable unit on any battlefield. This reframes the entire tragedy at Stonehenge. We are not looking at the execution of random prisoners or Viking raiders. We are likely witnessing the deliberate destruction of a king's own household troops. But why would anyone execute such valuable, high-status men? In the brutal politics of the age, the answer is chillingly pragmatic. If you defeat a rival king in battle, capturing or killing him is one thing. But to truly erase his power, you must annihilate the very institution that supports him. His retinue is the source of his authority. These men are the keepers of his legacy, the seeds from which a rebellion could regrow. Letting them live, even as prisoners, was an immense risk. They were bound by sacred oaths to avenge their lord. Their very existence was a threat. So, after a decisive battle, the victor would face a grim choice. He could try to integrate these elite warriors into his own forces, a dangerous gamble. Or he could make a terrifying example of them, a statement so absolute it would crush the spirit of the defeated kingdom for a generation. The choice of Stonehenge as the killing ground now takes on a devastating new clarity. This was not just about public spectacle, this was about symbolic annihilation. By executing the royal retinue at the giant's dance, the victor was doing more than killing men. He was severing the sacred bond between a lord and his followers on the most potent stage imaginable. He was demonstrating that his power could break even the most hallowed oath under the gaze of the ancient stones themselves. The disrespect of the burial, the stripping of possessions, the haphazard dumping, fits this theory perfectly. These were not granted the honorable burial of fallen warriors. They were treated as traitors to the new order, their identities and their loyalty scrubbed from the earth. Their decapitation was the physical severing of the bond that had defined their lives. So which king and which battle could have led to this catastrophic end for a royal war band? The search for answers pulls us deeper into the violent decades of the 9th century, to a time when kingdoms rose and fell with the swing of an axe. The radiocarbon window of 600 to 1020 AD is broad, but science can sharpen the focus. When statisticians analyze the spread of those dates, the probability curve peaks sharply in the 9th and 10th centuries. This is not just any period. This is the absolute core of the Viking Age in England, a 70-year storm of fire and blood that reshaped the island forever. Our mass execution almost certainly happened within this maelstrom. To understand what filled that pit, we must step into this specific, documented nightmare. The timeline begins with the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in 865, a vast coalition of Scandinavian warriors that moved like a force of nature, conquering kingdom after kingdom. By the 870s, they had destroyed Northumbria and East Anglia, and they turned their full fury on the last remaining major Anglo-Saxon power, the Kingdom of Wessex. This was the world of Alfred, a young king forced into the marshes, fighting a desperate guerrilla war for survival. His victory at the Battle of Edington in 878 was a turning point, but it did not bring peace. It created a stalemate formalized by the Treaty of Wedmore, which carved out the Danelaw, a huge portion of eastern and northern England where Viking law and settlement now ruled. For the next 50 years, the border between Wessex and the Danelaw was a permanent war zone, a simmering frontier of raids, skirmishes, and sudden, brutal incursions. The Salisbury Plain, where Stonehenge stands, was not a quiet backwater during this time. It was a vital strategic heartland for Wessex, crisscrossed by ancient roads like the Harrow Way and perilously close to contested territories. Historical records, though patchy, tell of constant violence. In the year 871, the same year Alfred fought 9 major battles, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes that a Viking army raided deep into Wessex, plundering a royal estate at Chippenham, not far from Stonehenge. In 1016, the Chronicle records a devastating Viking invasion that swept across Wessex, leading to a massive battle at Shurston in Wiltshire, a day's march from the Stones. These were not isolated events, they were the drumbeat of an era, and in this climate the political use of terror was a standard tactic. We know from other records that Viking leaders like Ivar the Boneless and later Sweyn Forkbeard used mass executions to break the will of towns and regions. Conversely, Anglo-Saxon kings, including Alfred and his successors, were merciless in putting down internal dissent or dealing with captured Viking warbands. The punishment for treason or oath-breaking was often beheading, so the stage is set with grim clarity. The late 9th or early 10th century, a frontier zone pulsing with tension. A monument that commands the landscape and a pit waiting to be filled. The question is no longer if this event is connected to the Viking Wars, but which specific clash, which moment of shattered loyalty or military catastrophe, led 36 men from across Britain to kneel together in the shadow of the hanging stones. The historical spotlight now falls on a single, towering figure from the chaos of the 9th century. Alfred, King of Wessex, later called the Great. His reign was defined by one overwhelming crisis, the Viking invasion, and his legendary comeback from the edge of annihilation. In the desperate winter of 878, Alfred was a fugitive king hiding in the marshes of Athelney. His kingdom had been overrun. By spring, he rallied his forces and met the great heathen army in a decisive clash at Ethandun, a battle that changed the course of English history. Alfred's victory was total. He forced the Viking leader Guthrum to surrender, to convert to Christianity, and to sign a treaty that partitioned England. The chronicles of the time, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, record this pivotal moment. They note that after his victory, Alfred took many prisoners. But the records are frustratingly silent on what happened to those captives. This is where our mystery finds a powerful and chilling possible answer. Could the mass grave at Stonehenge contain the lost prisoners of Ethandun? The timeline aligns perfectly. The radiocarbon peak for the bones centers on the late 9th century, exactly the period of Alfred's war. The location is strategically ideal. Stonehenge sits on the Salisbury Plain, well within Alfred's reclaimed kingdom of Wessex, a day's ride from the probable battlefield. For a king who had just won a miraculous victory, the need to consolidate his authority and deter future threats would have been overwhelming. Executing a large group of high-status prisoners would serve multiple brutal purposes. If they were captured Viking warriors, their deaths would be both revenge and a stark message to other would-be invaders. But there is another, even more provocative possibility. The isotopic analysis showed the men came from varied regions of Britain, not just Scandinavia. What if they were not Vikings at all? What if they were Anglo-Saxons from other kingdoms, or even from Wessex itself, who had broken their oaths and fought alongside Guthrum's army? To Alfred, these oath-breakers would be the ultimate traitors, a cancer within the body of his realm. Their betrayal was more dangerous than any foreign blade. For them, a standard execution would not suffice. Their punishment needed to be a spectacle of such magnitude it would burn the consequences of disloyalty into the soul of every subject. Stonehenge, the giant's dance, offered that stage. By ordering their decapitation at that ancient, awe-inspiring site, Alfred would have been performing a profound act of political theater. He was demonstrating that his royal justice was as eternal and immutable as the stones themselves. He was cleansing his land of treachery on a site of primal power, binding his new, hard-won authority to the deepest myths of the landscape. The haphazard burial fits this narrative of absolute condemnation. These men would be denied all honor, their bodies treated as refuse, their memories erased. They became a warning, not a lament. This hypothesis weaves the forensic evidence, the historical context, and the symbolic power of the location into a tragically coherent story. It presents Alfred not just as the heroic defender of England, but as a pragmatic and ruthless ruler who understood that to build a nation, he sometimes had to sow its fields with salt and bone. The stones of Stonehenge would then stand not only as a monument to Neolithic genius, but as a silent witness to the brutal birth pangs of England itself. Yet a good hypothesis must be tested, and another king from a later, equally violent century waits in the wings with his own compelling claim to this atrocity. But Alfred is not the only king whose hands were stained in this violent century. A later monarch ruling a more unified but still fractured England presents an equally compelling case. Half a century after Alfred's death, his grandson Edred came to the throne. His reign, from 946 to 955, was defined by one overwhelming and brutal struggle, the reconquest of the Viking kingdom of York. This was not a war against a foreign invader, but a vicious civil war within a divided England. The north, centered on York, was a powerful, independent Viking state, a remnant of the Danelaw that had its own kings and a fierce desire for autonomy. Edred was determined to crush it and bring all of England under the rule of the southern House of Wessex. His campaigns were notoriously severe. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes his armies ravaging the north, burning towns and monasteries. In one telling entry, it states that after a Northumbrian betrayal, Edred swore he would lay waste the whole land. This was a king who understood terror as a tool of statecraft. Now consider the timeline. Our radiocarbon dates extend well into the mid-10th century, perfectly encompassing Edred's bloody reign, and consider the victims. The isotopic analysis showed a mix of men from different geologies, including signatures that could point to northern Britain. What if these were not Alfred's oath breakers but Edred's captives? Imagine a scenario. Edred's army clashes with a coalition force loyal to the Viking king of York. That northern army would not be purely Scandinavian. It would be a mix of Norse settlers from York and their Anglo-Saxon allies from Northumbria, men whose families had lived under Viking rule for generations. If Edred captured a large group of such fighters after a battle or a siege, his dilemma would mirror his grandfather's. Letting them go would allow the rebellion to continue. Imprisoning them was a burden, but executing them, especially in a spectacular fashion, could break the spirit of the North. Where would he do it? Not in the North itself, where it might spark further hatred. He would bring them south, deep into the heart of his own power, to the symbolic core of the ancient kingdom of Wessex, and there, on the sweeping chalk plains, stood the giants' dance. By beheading these northern rebels at Stonehenge, Edred would be making a geopolitical statement written in blood. He was demonstrating that the reach of the Southern Crown now extended even to this most ancient site, and that those who defied it from any corner of the land would meet the same final, terrible justice. The diverse origins of the men fit this theory perfectly. A captured war band from a mixed Norse and Anglo-Saxon coalition in the north. Their lack of honorable burial reflects Edred's recorded wrath towards traitorous Northumbrians. In this light, the grave becomes a monument not to the Viking wars of survival, but to the brutal, painful process of forging a single English kingdom, hammered together on the anvil of Saxon ambition. So we stand at a crossroads between two kings, 2 centuries, and 2 defining conflicts. Both Alfred and Edred had the motive, the means, and the merciless temperament to order such an act. Science has brought us to the precipice of an answer, but it cannot choose between these 2 shadows from the past. To move closer, we must ask a more intimate question of the bones themselves. What can the very fabric of their being, their DNA, tell us about who they were in life and whose flag they followed to their deaths? The blade that fell at Stonehenge carried a meaning far heavier than its steel. In the Anglo-Saxon world, beheading was not merely an efficient way to kill. It was a loaded, symbolic act, a final sentence written on the body itself. To understand the terror of that day, we must see it through their eyes, not ours. For them, the self was not just a mind or a spirit, but an integrated whole of body and soul. A proper death and a proper burial with the body intact was essential for a peaceful journey to the afterlife. To be decapitated was to be forcibly dismantled. It was a deliberate act of spiritual sabotage, a curse meant to deny the victim wholeness in the next world. They would wander incomplete and dishonored for eternity. This belief echoes through their literature. In the epic poem Beowulf, the hero's final act is to behead the monstrous Grendel, not just to ensure its death, but to utterly desecrate and nullify its evil presence. The message was clear: destruction of the body meant destruction of the person's legacy and spiritual fate. This symbolism transformed an execution into something far more sinister. It was an act of total erasure, reaching beyond the grave. Now, layer this profound cultural belief onto the specific stage of Stonehenge. The perpetrator was not just killing men. He was orchestrating a ritual of absolute negation. By choosing beheading, he was condemning these souls to a fractured afterlife. By performing it at the Giant's Dance, a place already seen as a threshold to other realms, he was amplifying that condemnation with the site's own ancient, eerie power. And by doing it publicly, he was ensuring every witness understood the full, horrific depth of his message. This was not just about removing a threat. It was about demonstrating a power so complete it could dictate a man's destiny in this world and the next. The king, or the victor, was positioning himself not just as a political authority, but as a cosmic judge. He was saying, "My justice follows you even beyond death." The scattered bones in the Aubrey Hole are the physical proof of this chilling intent. They weren't just buried, they were discarded in pieces, a permanent reflection of the spiritual fragmentation intended for them. This transforms the event from a military action into a profound statement of ideological control, a brutal sermon preached in stone and blood. The ultimate disgrace was not their death, but their disposal. After the final blow fell and the bodies lay still, the work of erasure continued. The executioners did not dig a new grave. They did not lay the men to rest in a cemetery. Instead, they dragged the lifeless, headless corpses to one of the ancient Aubrey Holes, a pit dug thousands of years earlier for a purpose now forgotten, and they threw them in. This was not a burial, it was a discard. Imagine the scene, the dull thuds of bodies landing atop one another, limbs askew, a tangled heap of what was once a living, breathing community of men. The soil was shoveled back over them with haste, not reverence. This single act of callousness speaks volumes about how the victors viewed their victims. In the Anglo-Saxon world, how you were buried was a direct reflection of your status, your faith, and your place in the community. A proper Christian burial meant a dedicated plot in a consecrated graveyard, often with the body oriented east-west, awaiting the resurrection. Even for those holding to older beliefs, burial with goods, a spear for a warrior, a brooch for a noblewoman, a simple pot for a farmer, was essential. These objects were provisions for the journey to the afterlife, anchors for memory and identity. The men at Stonehenge received none of this. They were granted no sacred ground. They were given no possessions, not even the humble knife every man owned. They were denied the basic ritual that would have offered solace to their spirits and their families. This treatment formally marked them as outcasts, as individuals stripped of all social and spiritual value. It is very likely they were denied any Christian rights at all, which in that era would have been a terrifying condemnation, implying their souls were beyond salvation. This non-burial was a deliberate, crucial component of the punishment. The message was not simply, "You are dead." The message was, "You never existed." By refusing them a proper grave, the authority that ordered this sought to sever them from the collective memory. They would have no marker for loved ones to mourn at. Their names would not be spoken in prayer. In a culture where legacy was everything, this was a fate worse than death. the pit at Stonehenge became more than a mass grave. It became a monument to oblivion, a chilling attempt to use the very earth to silence a story. Yet in their desperation to erase these men, the executioners failed. The bones endured, and now, centuries later, they are telling their story louder than ever. Their skeletons hold more stories than just the final cut. A closer forensic examination of the bones reveals other traumas, whispers of violence that happened both in their last moments and across their lifetimes. On several of the arm bones, particularly the ulna and radius of the forearm, archaeologists discovered sharp, clean-cut marks. These are not the deep, focused blows to the neck. These are shallower, glancing strikes, and critically, they show no signs of healing. They were inflicted at or very near the time of death. This is a crucial distinction. A defense wound. It is the body's instinctive, desperate reaction to an attack. Picture a man raising his arm to shield his face or head from a descending blade. The weapon slices into the forearm instead, leaving its mark on the bone before the killing blow is delivered. These wounds tell us that for at least some of these men, their end was not a passive surrender. In their final seconds, instinct took over. They fought back, or at least tried to ward off the attack. This changes the texture of the event. It suggests a moment of chaos, resistance, and raw human terror amidst the grim formality of an execution. Beyond these peri-mortem injuries, the bones also recorded a history written in older, healed fractures. On a few skeletons, forensic experts found ribs that had been broken and mended, and one individual showed a fully healed fracture of the collarbone. These injuries, years old at the time of death, speak of a past filled with physical risk. A broken rib could come from a fall from a horse, a brawl, or a blow in training. A healed clavicle is a classic injury from a heavy impact, the kind sustained in a shield wall clash or a serious riding accident. While a farmer could certainly break a bone, the pattern here, when combined with the men's robust physique and prime age, points more consistently toward a life accustomed to conflict and combat training. These were not delicate scribes or sheltered craftsmen. They were men whose bodies bore the quiet, accumulated scars of a violent profession. Perhaps the most telling detail of all is found in who is not in the grave. The pit contained no children, no elderly men, and no women. Every single one of the 38 individuals was a male in the prime of life. This is not the demographic profile of a village massacred in a raid where the young and old would inevitably fall victim. This is a starkly selective group. It reflects a deliberate choice by the captors. They targeted a specific category of person, men of military age. This selectivity reinforces the theory that these men held a specific, valuable status. They were worth capturing alive and worth executing together. They were a coherent unit, a military asset. Whether they were a royal bodyguard, a noble's retinue, or a band of seasoned warriors, their collective fate was determined by their shared identity as fighters. Their deaths were a strategic act designed to cripple an enemy by eliminating its very backbone of strength. The silence of the grave is as eloquent as the bones within it. The absence of others confirms that this was a precise, surgical strike against the power structure of a rival, not a random act of savagery. The cold statistics of bone and isotope now find a voice in flesh and expression. Modern forensic science offers a profound gift, the ability to look into the eyes of the past. Using high-resolution, three-dimensional scans of the best-preserved skulls from the Stonehenge pit, specialists in craniofacial reconstruction begin a meticulous process of reverse engineering. They are not guessing at faces, they are rebuilding them from the architectural blueprint of the skull itself. The scan provides a digital foundation. First, forensic artists plot dozens of precise tissue depth markers across the skull's surface. Data points derived from population studies that tell them exactly how much muscle and skin would have covered each specific area of bone on a man of his age and likely ancestry. Then, like sculptors working with virtual clay, they layer on the musculature following the contours dictated by the bone's attachment points. A prominent brow ridge suggests a certain set of forehead muscles. The width of the nasal aperture dictates the shape of the nose. The set of the jaw and the wear on the teeth inform the structure of the mouth and lips. Finally, they add skin texture, hair, and eye color, informed by the broader genetic and historical context of early medieval Britain. The result is not a photograph, but a scientifically informed likelihood, a face that falls within the range of how this individual almost certainly appeared in life. Through CGI animation, we can watch this transformation unfold from the stark, silent skull to a living, breathing human being. The bone becomes a cheekbone, the empty socket fills with a watchful eye, the jawline gains the set of a mouth that once spoke, laughed, and shouted. This is the moment the mystery changes forever. We are no longer looking at a specimen labeled burial number 27. We are meeting a man. He might have a strong, square jaw from a lifetime of gritting his teeth. His nose may have been broken once and healed crooked. His hair, perhaps worn long in the fashion of a warrior, falls around a face that is weary, resolute, or even surprisingly young. The emotional impact of this is staggering. It collapses 1,000 years of distance in an instant. These were not faceless casualties of a forgotten war. They were individuals, each with a unique story etched into their very bones. One reconstruction might reveal a man with kind eyes and a gentle brow, another a face hardened by sun and conflict. Seeing them transforms the historical event from an academic puzzle into a visceral human tragedy. It forces us to ask new, more intimate questions. Who did this man leave behind? Did he have a wife waiting in a village to the north, a child who would never know his face? What was his name? The forensic artistry does something archaeology alone cannot. It restores the humanity that their executioners sought so ruthlessly to strip away. They are no longer just 38 beheaded men. They are 38 lost lives, and we can finally look upon them. This connection makes the weight of their fate and the cold calculation of the power that ordered it feel immediate and unbearably real. Their reconstructed faces make the history books feel suddenly, painfully close. This discovery at Stonehenge does far more than solve a single archaeological mystery. It fundamentally rewrites the entire story we tell about this iconic place, and in doing so, transforms our understanding of history itself. For generations, Stonehenge has been presented as a sealed chapter, a magnificent relic of the deep Neolithic past whose story ended when its builders walked away. We have obsessed over how they moved the stones and why they aligned them with the sun, framing the monument as a beautiful, static puzzle from a lost world. The mass grave shatters that frozen image. It proves Stonehenge was not a time capsule but a living stage. Its story did not end in 1500 BC. For over 2,000 years after the last stone was raised, it continued to gather meaning, to witness the full spectrum of human experience playing out in its shadow. This single pit connects the world of the ancient astronomers directly to the world of medieval kings, Viking armies, and the brutal birth of a nation. The narrative of Stonehenge is no longer just about its creation. It is now a continuous saga of awe, power, and terror that spans more than 4 millennia. The stones have watched it all. This provides something historians of the Anglo-Saxon period have always craved: physical proof. Our knowledge of that era comes largely from manuscripts like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by monks in distant monasteries. These records tell us of battles, of kings, of executions for treason. But they are words on a page, often brief and politically slanted. The grave at Stonehenge is the chilling, tangible reality behind those words. Here is the forensic evidence of large-scale judicial killing, exactly the kind of event the chronicles might summarize in a single, grim sentence. The bones corroborate the written record, confirming that such brutal state-sanctioned violence was not just a literary trope but a practiced tool of power. Yet they also complicate the story. The chronicles typically name kings and nobles, the movers of history. This pit contains the unnamed, the followers, the human cost of those grand political decisions. It gives voice through science to the people the documents silently passed over. We now have a corporeal link between the dry facts of royal policy and the raw, human suffering it caused. Finally, the discovery reveals a profound pattern in how cultures interact with the legacy of those who came before. The Anglo-Saxons did not understand why Stonehenge was built. They saw it as the giant's dance, a place of eerie, ancient power, and so they did not ignore it or quarry it for building stone. They repurposed it. They harnessed its existing primal aura for their own needs, layering a new and terrifying function onto its ancient form. This act of symbolic reuse is a powerful human impulse. We see it in Rome, where the Colosseum became a fortress. We see it in Egypt, where Pharaoh's temples were converted into churches. A site of power retains its magnetism long after its original purpose fades, attracting new meanings like a lightning rod. The Anglo-Saxon king who ordered the executions at Stonehenge was making a calculated statement. By using the monument as his gallows, he was binding his own temporal authority to the timeless, mythic authority of the land itself. He was saying his law was as ancient and inescapable as the stones. This transforms our view of the monument from a solitary wonder to a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and written over again, with each generation inscribing its own fears and ambitions upon the same enduring landscape. The mystery of Stonehenge we now see is not locked in its Neolithic origins. It is an unfolding story of how humanity continually finds, fears, and reimagines the powerful places left behind by time. Science has brought us to the edge of the truth, but it cannot take us the final step. We may never know the exact king who gave the order. The name of the forgotten battle that delivered these men into captivity is lost to time. The victims themselves remain anonymous, their personal names and the specific oaths they swore silenced forever. Archaeology, for all its power, deals in probabilities, not courtroom certainties. It presents us with a heartbreakingly clear picture of the how, the when, and the who in a general sense, but it cannot fill in the final, intimate details of personal loyalty and political betrayal. This gap is not a failure of the science, but a reminder of the sheer scale of time we are confronting. Some stories, etched only in perishable memory and lost parchment, are truly gone. A few alternative theories persist on the fringes, though they lack the strong evidence of the execution scenario. Could this have been a bizarre survival of a pagan ritual, a mass sacrifice echoing practices thousands of years older? The clean, judicial nature of the wounds and the total lack of ritual objects make this highly improbable. Was it a plague pit, a hasty burial for victims of a pandemic? Disease does not sever heads with sharp blades. These less likely ideas highlight a key point. When faced with a shocking discovery, the human mind races through possibilities, but the physical evidence acts as an anchor, pulling us back to the most plausible, if grim, conclusion: state-sanctioned terror. This is where the future of the mystery lies. The story is not closed, it is merely paused. The next chapter may be written by a science that was in its infancy when these bones were first uncovered, ancient DNA analysis. Imagine extracting genetic material from these skeletal remains. We could potentially discover if these men were related to each other. Were they brothers, cousins, a band of kin fighting together? We could trace their deep ancestry with incredible precision, mapping their genetic origins to specific regions of Scandinavia, Scotland, or Wales, far beyond what isotopes can suggest. We might even find living descendants today, creating a biological bridge across a millennium. This technology is evolving rapidly, and each new bone sample from the pit holds a library of information waiting for the right key. So the stones keep one final secret for now. The great shadow of the event is clear, but the specific figures who cast it remain just out of reach. This unresolved tension is what makes the discovery so profoundly human and so endlessly compelling. We are left with the haunting image of those reconstructed faces, their eyes meeting ours across the centuries, silently holding the answer to a question we may never fully voice. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not just about the kings who ruled, but about the individuals who lived, fought, and died under the weight of those decisions. And as long as their bones endure and science advances, their story is still being told. The silent stones hold a dual legacy, carved by two very different kinds of human ambition. They are a soaring testament to Neolithic genius, to a people who looked at the sky and dared to build a calendar in stone. Their spiritual yearning, their communal effort, their deep connection to the cosmos is all still palpable in the alignments of the summer solstice. Yet those same stones also stand as a stark monument to a later, grimmer ambition, the raw, brutal exercise of power. The chalk beneath them is stained with a history of terror, a calculated act meant to break spirits and forge kingdoms through fear. This is not a contradiction, it is a completion. To see Stonehenge only as a pristine temple of ancient astronomy is to see a statue without its shadow. The shadow gives it depth, weight, and a terrible reality. Knowing that the same winds that once carried chants and prayers also carried the final cries of condemned men does not diminish the monument's majesty. It transforms it. It makes Stonehenge less of a remote, alien puzzle and more of a profoundly human place, a stage upon which the full spectrum of our nature has played out, from the most sublime collaboration to the most calculated cruelty. The monument becomes a continuous witness, its story stretching unbroken from those who raised it in hope to those who used it in wrath. This layered legacy asks something difficult of us. Do we prefer our ancient wonders sanitized and mysterious, forever locked in a single moment of creation? Or can we embrace them as they truly are, palimpsests of history where light and shadow are forever intertwined? To stand at Stonehenge now is to stand at a crossroads of time, feeling the awe of the builders and the echo of the executioner's blade with equal force. It connects us not just to a lost civilization, but to the unbroken, often painful thread of power, belief, and survival that defines our shared past. The stones do not judge the history they have seen. They simply endure, reminding us that places of wonder are never just one thing. They are mirrors, reflecting back both our greatest aspirations and our most enduring flaws. The journey from that first trowel-scraping bone to this reconstructed story is a masterclass in how history reveals itself. We began with a jumble of skeletons in an ancient pit, a silent mystery waiting in the chalk. Science gave us the first keys, radiocarbon dating shattered our timeline, and isotopic analysis sketched a map of their diverse origins. Forensic osteology read the violent poetry of blade marks on bone, telling us exactly how they died. Step by step, we moved from anonymous remains to a group of men in their prime, a warrior retinue likely gathered from across Britain. We then had to place them into the violent tapestry of their age, the fractured kingdoms of the Heptarchy, and the existential storm of the Viking invasions. Two powerful kings, Alfred and Edred, emerged from the historical record as figures with the motive and the means to order such a terrifying spectacle. Their reconstructed faces finally returned their humanity, forcing us to see individuals where once we only saw evidence. Solving the immediate mystery of who, when, and how, however, only opened a deeper, more profound line of inquiry. This is not just a story about an execution. It is a story about power itself, how it is asserted, maintained, and etched into the collective memory of a people. It is about the deliberate reuse of a sacred, awe-inspiring space for an act of calculated terror, layering a new, brutal meaning onto an ancient, spiritual one. The stones of Stonehenge remind us that history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous conversation between the past and the present, where every generation inscribes its own fears and ambitions upon the landscape. History is not just in books, it is buried in the earth, waiting for us to listen. What other secrets do you think ancient sites hold? Share your theories below, and do not forget to subscribe for more mysteries solved.